Hey, good morning, everybody. I am so thrilled to be here with a fellow Penguin Random House author, Therese Huston. I'm going to get this right. I'm going to keep in the damn city of New York with Houston and Houston, Texas, and with the last name like Hoey, I get it messed up all the time too. So anyway, Therese, good morning. Great to see you.
Good morning, Kelly. It is so great to be here with you. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So if those who don't know Therese and you haven't been looking at my Instagram and Twitter, she's the author of this fabulous book. And friends who will be watching know that I like a nonfiction book, and I go crazy when I get a nonfiction book I don't like. And this one I absolutely love. And this is not just because Therese is sitting right in front of me. She is a cognitive scientist. She's a feedback guru. And she is the author of this book. So done a whole lot of stuff. She was the founding director, I'm going to read this, founding director for the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning at Seattle University. And this book, Let's Talk, Make Effective Feedback Your Superpower. Well, it's a guide for managers and leaders to get their together. There's the poop emoji when you need it, right. On feedback. But I want to start with this. There's a lot in this book. Why is employee perception of feedback so important?
It's a great question, Kelly. And employee perception is crucial in how people experience feedback. So there's been a lot of research showing that there are 4 fabulous things that happen if your employees think you're good. If you're a manager and your employees think you're good at feedback, research indicates there are 4 things that are likely to happen. So 1 is your employees will do more creative work. Okay. 2, yeah, that's great. Everybody wants more creative, innovative work. That's a great one.
I'll take, who needs 4? I'll take that one.
Anyway, just take that one, just the innovative, creative work. The second is that they'll like you more as a manager and they'll be more loyal to you, which is also great. Number 3, they're going to find their work more complex and more interesting. And that might be why they're doing more creative work, is because they think their work is more interesting. And the 4th is they're less likely to look for a new job. So, and that's probably related to all 3, because if you like your work more, you're less likely to look for a new job. If you're more loyal, you're less likely to look for a new job. But think about that. Simply by getting good at feedback, you get all of these benefits from the people who are on your team. They're working harder, they like you more, they're doing more creative work. And the important part of this is in these research studies that found all these benefits, they didn't measure what the manager did. They didn't measure, did the manager use some particular feedback model? What they looked at and found was a key predictor was, did the employee think that you, the manager, were good? However you did it, did I think that you cared about me? And so this is a key takeaway, is that from my book, is that we need to be good at feedback as managers in the eyes of our employees. If they think we're good at feedback, we're golden. And so a lot of my book is like, how can you give feedback in a way that feels good to the employee? Because their perception is key.
And in all of that, I'm thinking, you haven't said you have to change the nature of people's work. They're doing the same work, you're just giving them good feedback, like the process of giving the feedback. And I love the part about loyalty and not looking for a job, because isn't that something we're so concerned about right now?
Yeah.
You know, with people going back to work and all the rest of it. One of the things I like about the StreamYard platform we're on, Therese, is I get to do things like this. And yes, Lolita, you need to purchase, like anyone who is managing and leading people. I'd say even if it's a community organization, even if it is a not-for-profit or you've got a fundraiser, I mean, you're managing, and you got to motivate people so they're creative and loyal and they stick to it. I can't say it enough. And you know, I am the person who highlights and folds pages. So anyway,
well, it might be helpful, Kelly, for me to tell a quick story from the book. I interviewed 60 people from the book, and people love stories. So I'll tell a story of a bad feedback experience. So I'll call this person Luis. Luis worked in HR, and he had just finished his first year on a new job. He was really pleased because he thought the year had gone really well, and it was time for his annual performance review. So he sits down with his boss, and she turns around and pulls a binder off of the shelf that he has never seen before, right? She opens up the binder and she says, okay, Louise, so last February, you said this in a meeting, and she turns the page. And then in March, when you turned in blank, you were a day late. And she went through feedback for an entire year in one meeting. She'd never said any of this to him. And he was so floored. He's just like, yeah, exactly. You're right.
My kid's just around the floor on this one. I'm trying to get it out. Yep.
I know. And there are probably managers who are watching this thinking, I would never do that. I would never save it all up. But I've talked to so many managers, especially during COVID, who don't want to crush someone's spirit. So they're going to wait. They're just going to hope that the problem resolves itself. And pretty soon 3 weeks have gone by, and then 4 weeks have gone by, and they haven't said anything. And so it's very easy, especially during COVID, to just think, I'm just going to wait. I'm just going to wait. But then it gets worse, because by the time you do bring it up, that person thinks, why didn't you tell me? Anyway, needless to say, Luis did not stick around for another year to find out what the next year's binder would bring, right? He was like, I'm out of here. You're terrible at feedback. So he's a great example of the kind of research that shows that people will feel loyal if you give them good feedback, and they won't feel loyal if you don't.
Oh my God, I'm just having, of course, in my Kelly Hoey way, I'm having one of those, well, who needs binders full of women as a bad thing? We can have a binder full of really poor way to do feedback. People,
There you go.
no binders for women, no binders for feedback. There we go. If you take nothing else. I also wanted just to say a good morning. Hello, Nuala, lovely. Thank you for joining us from Belfast. And those who are watching on LinkedIn or YouTube and or Periscope, because this is streaming on Twitter. Nice. If you've got questions, you've got comments, but tell us where you are. And one of my favorite people, thank you, Natalie. Thank you for sharing these just absolute pearls from Therese. And for the folks who don't know, Natalie, her Lead Loudly community is really fantastic, and just a really great, we don't need that Twitter loss. So that's too bad. And I double click there, technology and me this morning. Here we go. So why we think about feedback, and we think about what this boss of Luis's pulled out the binder and said, why for managers and leaders, why is listening so important?
And I'm glad you brought this up, Kelly, because this is one of the skills that we don't tend to think about when we're giving feedback. We tend to think about what I need to say as the manager. What's my script? What's my go-to phrase? You know, you do a Google search. How do I say blank to so-and-so? How do I say blank to a millennial, or whatever it might be? So we're thinking about what we're saying. But what the research shows is that it's so important to be a good listener. So I did a research study where I surveyed 417 people about their very worst feedback experience to find out what would have made it better. Is there anything, when you think about your worst feedback experience at work, is there anything at all that would have made it better? And the most common responses, there were two that stood out. One was, I wish my hard work had been acknowledged. If my boss had just acknowledged my hard work, that would have made all the difference. And the second through fifth most common answers, so number one was acknowledge my hard work, but number 2 through number 5 were all about how I wanted my manager to listen to me. I just wish my manager had asked for my perspective, or I wish that my manager had listened to my side of the story. People in feedback conversations don't want a good talker, they want a good listener. And this is something that so many of us can bring as managers, but we don't think about it in a feedback conversation, right? We're not thinking I need to be a good listener, but it's crucial to do, and the other person will have so much more respect for you as a manager. Again, it bumps up that perception of you as a good feedback giver.
Wow. No, it's, I'm just, I'm thinking in terms of things in your book, and I also was trying to think, what do you do with all that bad feedback? That just sounds like another imprint that Penguin Random House should do. Bloopers, feedback bloopers. But you think so many times managers are thinking about a script, and so instead you're saying, no, you need to get your ears out and sip your mouth, all this kind of stuff. what are ways, I'm thinking all this, because yes, employees are juggling a lot, and managers are, as you've sort of noted, they've been holding off on giving feedback, hoping problems go away, and they're juggling a lot. How can employees help managers give them better feedback?
So you're right that managers are juggling a lot, especially if you're still working in a remote environment or you're working in some hybrid environment where you're in the office 2 days a week and you're working from home 3 days a week. Microsoft did a study last summer. So just 4 months into COVID, what Microsoft was finding was that managers were working on average an extra 8 hours a week just to manage all their communications, right? And what used to happen is you'd walk back together after a meeting and your manager would give you feedback. Here's what I saw, here's what I'm thinking. What did you think, right? But we don't have those informal things anymore. We don't have those walk back to the cubicle together. And so ways that employees can help their managers who are probably feeling overwhelmed, just like you are, so two key things that you can do. So one key thing that you can do is when you have a deliverable, let's say you just gave a presentation or you just submitted something, ahead of time, set it up on your manager's schedule to have a debrief so that your manager, and you can even let him know or let her know, hey, that conversation is about, I just put a 20-minute meeting on your calendar. Here's what it's about. Or can we do this sometime that day? My presentation's in the morning. I'm available all afternoon. I'd love your feedback. And by helping your manager make sure they schedule it, if you can put it on their calendar, you're ensuring that first of all, you're demonstrating I'm serious about this. I really want your feedback. And secondly, you're helping your manager find time for it. And maybe your manager can't do it that day, but as close to the deliverable as possible. I'd advise telling your manager you want this debrief. The other thing is what I hear again and again in my interviews is people saying, their managers saying, just keep up the good work. No, people ask for feedback and their managers are like, no news is good news, right? Or I love the work you do. As long as unless I bring up a complaint, I have nothing to worry about. And that's not helpful, right? That's not helpful if you're an employee. You want to know what to improve. So some things that you can do to help your manager articulate what you could do differently. A strategy I love and that I hear other people love is to go into your boss. Let's say your boss says, just keep doing what you're doing, and you're frustrated and discouraged by that feedback. What you do is you go into your boss and say, okay, I appreciate that, but I really want to up level. I really want to improve my game. So here are 4 things that I could be doing differently. Which would be your top priority? And now your manager is like, whoa, this person is really serious about improvement. And either your manager is going to pick one of those and help you tweak exactly what they're looking for, or your manager is going to say, that's a nice list, but if we're having a candid conversation, I'd really like you to work on this instead, right? And that's what I hear from a lot of people. And that's my experience with my boss. Is usually my boss goes to number 5. It's not even on my list. But now we've finally gotten to, here's the real thing. Here's the concrete piece of advice that I have for you. So those would be 2 things. Schedule with your manager to have the debrief so they know you're serious. And 2, go in with your own list of suggestions so your manager doesn't have to come up with something on the spot.
That's awesome. And it's we seek feedback, and then we almost want to duck and hide, if we're actually going to get it. And so, it's sort of I want feedback, but not that feedback.
Yeah, exactly.
To see another familiar face here. Hi, Siobhan. We're attracting my Irish community of fabulous women entrepreneurs and business owners. Thank you for making us part of your day to day there across the pond. And yes, and Siobhan again, yes, being proactive about chasing it. If you want, don't complain that you don't get it if you haven't maybe chased it, and maybe create these opportunities. And I love this. It aligns with things I think about. How are we proactive in taking control of our careers and the things that we want, which maybe, there was questions you and I had talked about, and let me jump down on one, because this was one of the case studies I think was so good. And this is all about feedback, helping people make more informed career choices. And it's, how do you initiate these? And this is that story of Crystal, which is, as I said to you right at the very beginning of the book, and I was like, yes, like, how do we seek that feedback instead of getting like massively frustrated and peeved with maybe an uncomfortable answer around why we're not getting, you know, the career opportunities we think we deserve. Can you talk about like how can we have some of this feedback, which might be awkward, or how do we ask that awkward question to kind of, you know, pop the balloon and make it happen?
Oh, and it is, and you're so right that people ask for feedback, but then they duck, right? And you can even see it. People are braced, right? But I'll tell Crystal's story, and Crystal's a pseudonym. She asked me not to use her real name, but this is a real person and a real story. So I'll tell Crystal's story, and then we can extract the lessons from Crystal's story. So Crystal is in the nonprofit sector in fundraising, and she was an associate director of a fundraising nonprofit. And the director's job came up. So basically the job right above her. And she's like, I've been doing this for years. Her track record was amazing. You know, basically the money's in the bank or it's not with fundraising, right? And for her, the money was in the bank. So she had a good track record of fundraising, of raising the funds for this nonprofit. So she decides to apply, and she doesn't get the job, but that's okay, right? You know, we put ourselves out there, we try, but she didn't get any feedback. She was just told basically, you know, it's not a good fit. It's not the right time. A couple of years later, yeah, right. It's not a good fit. What is that? That is so vague and so unhelpful. The job came open again a couple of years later, and she applied again, and again, she didn't get it. So over the course of just over 5 years, she applied for the director's job 3 times and never got the job. And every time she would ask for feedback, and they would just kind of give a hand waving, like, you're doing great work. We just don't think you're the right fit for the director's job. And that was it. So at this point, I mean, not surprisingly, Kelly, she's looking for another job, right? She thinks she's ready to be a director after 5 years, and they're not giving her this job. And her mentor says, try one more time. Don't give up. I'm not saying you can definitely apply for a different job, but you need to find out what's going wrong here, why you aren't getting the job for this organization that says they love you so much. So she asks someone on the board of directors, who is also on the search committee for the director's job. She asks her out for coffee. They go out for coffee, and Crystal lays it on the line. Crystal says, okay, I realize there might be some things you can't tell me, but I feel like I'm at a turning point in my career, and I'm wondering, is there any piece of advice you can give me that will help me going forward? Is there something that I'm doing that I shouldn't be doing? Is there something that I'm not doing? Any advice you can give me going forward would really be helpful in my career. And the person from the board of directors is quiet for a few moments. Oh, and what she also said is, Crystal said, I promise I won't cry. I promise I won't get angry. I will just learn from your feedback, and I will absorb it and make the most of it. So she promised I won't get upset. So the person from the board of directors sits for a couple of awkward seconds, and she finally blurts out, you wear too much gold. I'm not even kidding. You wear too much gold. Now this nonprofit didn't deal in like the jewelry industry or anything. This made like no sense, right? But Crystal kept her word. She didn't get angry. She didn't cry. She just said, okay, thank you. I'll take that into consideration. And then they kind of wrapped up, and Crystal's thinking, what? My jewelry has nothing whatsoever to do with this, right? But then she went to a conference a couple of weeks later, and she was looking around, and all the directors who were women, they all had really simple jewelry, just a wedding band. Maybe if they had earrings, they just had gold studs. If they wore a necklace, they just wore a pearl necklace. Really simple jewelry. None of the big gold jewelry that she loved to wear, right? She liked to have the bracelets, bangles on her wrists, making noise when she walked down the hall. She loved that. So what can we take from this? So, first of all, some of you are thinking, you should leave this company, because if they have 3 directors in 5 years, this is not an organization you want to work for. Oh, I know, right, Sean? I know, right? This makes your head explode. You might also be thinking they should have done such a better job with that feedback for her. I mean, what Crystal put together was, if you're going to have the most outward-facing job in our organization, we need you to send the message, we're going to be conservative stewards with your money. and maybe wearing jewelry doesn't send that message. So you can wear all the jewelry you want, but maybe when you're meeting with our top donors, we would ask that you swap out pearl earrings or something, right? They could have handled this a much better way. So that's the second takeaway. They could have found a way to deliver this message in a way that gave Crystal power instead of the lack of power that they gave her, right? But then there's two other takeaways that are really important here, and this applies to anyone. So first of all, if you're finding you're running into a roadblock, you need to figure out who to ask and how to ask it. You need to go to them and say, someone who you think might be an advocate for you, go to them and say, all right, can you help me figure this out? Because I can't figure it out on my own. You have an insight that I don't have. And you can reassure them, I promise I won't get angry. I promise I won't get sad like Crystal did. And the fourth key takeaway, and this was brilliant on Crystal's part, she asked for advice, not feedback. So there's fabulous research by Leslie John out of Harvard Business School. Oh, actually, sorry, it's Jae-Woon Yoon, a different researcher. She's also at Harvard Business School. So what Professor Yoon finds is that simple word change, if you ask for advice instead of feedback, people are much more likely to give you concrete suggestions. When you ask someone for feedback, they tend to think that you're asking for an evaluation of your past work. If you ask for advice, they tend to think you're asking for forward looking, right? What do I do in the future? And Crystal even said that. She said, what's the advice you have for me going forward? She really emphasized the forward looking. So that's the fourth takeaway, I think, from this. And it's a brilliant piece of advice. Don't ask for feedback. Ask someone for advice so that you can make good career choices because they see something that you can't see. I love telling Crystal's story. I mean, it breaks my heart, right? And she did quickly find a new director's job at another organization, so that's great news. But she also decided not to wear the jewelry. She decided she would swap out her jewelry in the lobby each morning. If she wanted to wear her amazing earrings, but she had a meeting with a donor, take them off, swap them out for a pair of gold studs.
Right. Well, you know what? It's sort of like with networking. It's like deciding, like, getting the feedback that Crystal was getting is the idea of you want to be heard, but the other person has to hear you. And that is not in what you have to say, but in your delivery so that they, and we know, as you said, the variety of organizations and donors, and some organizations may have less conservative donors, but they may equally want to be able to say, are these people good stewards with our money and what we perceive that to be? But I mean, I've had other people in terms of the idea of, I remember working in a big law firm, and someone said to a woman, oh, you're in the office. And she used to spend a lot of time in the Istanbul office for this firm. And she's like, I'm here more than I am there, but no one ever saw her. So she had almost like the reverse Crystal problem. She was not visible by any sort of means of, it was sort of like filled in the suit, the dark suit. So actually adding those kind of accessories were key so that people saw her.
See, isn't that fascinating? But she needed someone to help give her that insight, that one of the problems was that people weren't noticing her enough. She didn't stand out enough. And these are the kinds of gems of precious insights that we can't figure out for ourselves often, right? We need some outside observer to let us know, here's the norm around this, or you could stand out, and here are two things you could do to stand out. Maybe you can generate more, but we really need outsiders' perspectives on this. And so managers, if you're reluctant to say, I was just consulting with someone yesterday who's got a lot of millennials on his team, and a lot of them are actually Gen Z because they're college grads. And the women that he's got that are brand new hires are wearing short shorts to work, right? And he's like, oh boy, okay, how am I going to have this conversation to let them know that, like, we've got to uphold a particular image in the office, and I'm concerned people aren't going to take you seriously. I'm concerned clients aren't going to take you seriously, and I want everyone to see the potential that I see in you, right? So he's trying to figure out, how does he have this this conversation. And there's also the gender issue. It's a male manager having this conversation with young women. It's, you know, it's tricky, but these women could be creating a really negative impression of lack of maturity or of not taking clients seriously. And so anyway, it's a tricky issue. He's still figuring out how to navigate.
I'm just doing this because one of the books, just a second,
Sure.
that I have read recently, Open Secret. Stella Remington was the first woman to lead MI5.
Oh,
and as soon as you said, you know, young woman, you know, getting her first job out of college when she was sort of in the final round of interviews to work for an archivist, she was going to go into the interview and this old guy looked at her and said, "Sit up straight." Because, yeah, I guess he was desperate to hire her. She was going into a final round with some other people, and he didn't want this, you know, mousy, quiet, slouching young woman not to get hired. So he had to speak to her like a father, like, sit up straight.
Just, gosh darn it, just sit up straight and you'll get this job, right? You need to present. And it's really fascinating. You know, we're getting into these issues of how we present ourselves, which I'm sure as a networking expert is one of the things that you have to look at with people is, you know, what's the image, what's the impression that we make on others? And it's tricky.
Right. Because will they hear us? Will they see us?
Yes.
If we don't approach them, which is not, you know, some of this can get it, you know, you and I are going to have another conversation because I haven't gotten through all my questions, and we had like some good stuff that was coming in here, and I wanted to share this. Yes. I'm learning to, yes. Yes. So, I mean, that was one of the things I really wanted to get into so promise me you'll come back and we can do this again. I know we've got a few more minutes here, but we're not going to get through all our stuff. I already know. I would love to dive in, you know, some of these remote employees who, you know, how managers, you know, now in terms of, right, you might have had some virtual engagement with them. Now, what are you going to do? Okay. You know, how can we raise with our managers things like the ways we've been more productive or worked better during COVID? I have a relative who is bipolar. Working from home and having that accommodation during COVID has made him phenomenally productive. Now, fortunately, he works for an educational institution, and so that institution is finding ways to make an accommodation going forward, knowing that his productivity is going to, you know, go through the, you know, floor and into the toilet and the gutter if they bring him back full time into the office. So things like that. And then one of our favorite people, hello, Netta from Penguin Random House. This is like a phenomenal question. And I would really, I'm going to send this question to you, Therese, so that you can come back and talk. Like, how do we deliver feedback up? Because, you know, there's all of those other kinds of things. But maybe, you know, in the time that we have left today, a question for you. What about feedback when it's to a team? Like, you as the manager need to deliver the feedback to the team because the team dynamic's so important. And while everyone could probably improve with the feedback, everybody on the team knows who the problem is.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Not me.
Not me. Okay, this is really a message for Bridget, not for the rest of us, right? So it's really important as a manager to figure out, does the feedback need to go to the team or does the feedback need to go to an individual? And my advice is always, if you can insert someone's name and you can say like Austin blank or Bridget blank, if you can insert a name into the feedback you're about to give, then you should definitely give it one-on-one. You know, you don't. So what would be a situation where you'd give feedback to the team? Let's say you just saw, you know, the team put together a client proposal this morning, and you know you noticed that there was some crucial data missing, and you're not sure. Wait, why was that data missing? And so you might then come to the team and say, okay, so I was surprised I noticed that we were missing some data from this past quarter, and I was surprised we didn't include that. Can people help me understand what got in the way of including that data? And now the team can help you, let you know, right, we didn't have the numbers, or we thought this client would be more interested in blank for these reasons, right? They can tell you. But if you know that, like, Austin, your part of the presentation was subpar, right? Then have that conversation with Austin separately, because he won't be nearly as defensive if you bring it up with him one-on-one. One thing that you can do as a manager, a really skillful thing you can do, is to help your team get used to processing feedback as a group. So one piece of advice that I often give to managers, if you've started a new project with the team, on the second or third meeting, ask some question like, on a scale of 1 to 5, and this is to the whole group, on a scale of 1 to 5, how well are people sharing the workload? Give it a score. And then once you hear people's scores, and people are going to feel awkward at first, they're going to be very hesitant to give you this feedback this first time you do this. But you're setting a norm that we're going to give one another feedback. We're going to be candid and helpful to one another. And then you can say to the group, okay, so what needs to change? Because some of you said it was a 5, that we're sharing the workload great. Some of you gave it a 1. What do you think needs to change? And then you can give your observations. You can say, well, it's really helpful to hear what you think, but here's what I've noticed about how we're sharing work. And here are the concerns that I have right now that are raised for me. And that first time, like I said, that conversation is going to be awkward, but you're going to make it easier than the next time you have a conversation about sharing workload. And trust me, there is probably someone on your team who is wishing that you had a conversation about sharing workload, because they're feeling that they're doing the lion's share.
Yeah, it's sort of like how you set things up in the beginning, how you have that transparency of your group. But if you haven't done that and you're having to do this kind of retro, clean up the work dynamic that and the allocation, and who didn't get the memo in the first place, that it's a team project. Anyway, I'm looking at these questions. There's some really great stuff. Yes, everything from Crystal's story, which yes makes you want to light your hair on fire, but at the same time you're like, oh right, it was a lightning rod for Crystal, who said, oh right, this is within my power to control. Yes. And I had never imagined that this could be a barrier to my promotion. Things on dress codes, managing up. Yes, absolutely, Natalie. So critical. So much more to talk about. So you and I on email, we'll figure something out. And I was writing things, there's Netta's question we had, there's new students, new hires who've never been through this process. So they might get Luisa's binder experience. I think all too on this, on the matter of dress, there is a feedback story, or a way to maybe have a feedback conversation, and I'll find that and I'll share that with you, and we can talk about it. So, wow, this has been amazing, and I'm sure there's like a whole bunch of other topics you have. But please, let's schedule something for after the summer, early in the fall, to come back and reconvene.
I'd love that. I'd love to talk about giving feedback up. I'd love to talk about how do you give feedback about a personal issue, like a hygiene issue or a dress code issue. There are some issues that none of us ever want to have to give feedback on, but we can brainstorm together. Hygiene, right?
The worst thing as a manager, you need to go, hey, I remember my boss said that to me one time. Hey, Kelly, you're the woman on, the female manager. I can't have that conversation. I'm like, dude, I'm going to kill you.
Yes, I hear you.
Well, this has been so phenomenal. Thank you to everybody for joining us. Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for writing it in a way that is so user-friendly, I want to say, and the right mix of just everything. This is so good. Every one of you haven't. Let's talk about why you haven't bought Let's Talk, but let's talk about you reading and buying it now. All right.
There you go. I want to say everything with me, Kelly. You're a great book promoter. I appreciate it.
Well, this has been great. And thank you again, everyone, for watching.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.